Endphase begins shipping its first American-made inverters, prompted in large part by the Inflation Reduction Act incentives. 67% of all Americans, according to a new poll, favor the development of renewable energy over the continued use of fossil fuels. And energy jobs showed a substantial increase in 2022, but there were a few surprises in the data. I'm Jay Warmke with Blue Rock Station, and this is the news from the solar industry for the week of July 10th. All right, so as an example that renewable energy is going mainstream, Wallbox has announced a partnership with Costco in that they will begin selling their best-selling Pulsar Plus charging station at Costco outlets. This is a 40 amp level 2 electric vehicle charger. It is considered a smart charger where it is activated through Alexis, so you can voice activate it, and it can also be used to level the loads within your home. This retails in the neighborhood of $600 to $650. President Biden attended an announcement on July 6th in which Endphase announced they'll begin shipping their microinverters from the South Carolina plant. This plant and several others across the country have been developed in large measure because the Inflation Reduction Act does add a 10% tax credit for solar projects that use American-made products, microinverters being the most common inverter system within residential systems in the country. These South Carolina facilities will are manufacturing the IQ8 series product line, and they're anticipating that once they're fully operational, they'll be pushing out about 18 million of these microinverters each year from these facilities and employ about 600 people. About $105 million was raised in a recent auction from the Bureau of Land Management by leasing public lands for solar development. Now, about 23,000 acres was leased in the Nevada desert. Nevada Energy paid about $80 million for these leases, and NextEra Energy Resource Company paid about $25 million. Now combined, it's anticipated that these projects will produce about 3 gigawatts of power. However, renewable energy is still quite a small amount of the money that is raised through leases of federal property. In fact, in 2023, it's anticipated that oil and gas leases will raise about $10 billion from leases for oil and gas, although renewable energy is gaining ground. A recent poll by the Pew Research Center has indicated that there is widespread support for renewable energy amongst the American public. They do anticipate that this support does in fact extend for the development of renewables, but not at the expense of fossil fuels. About 74% of those surveyed support international efforts by the U.S. to try and curb climate change. About 67% favor the development of renewable energy over fossil fuels. 61% support a net zero emissions goal by 2040. And if you get into very specifics, it's a lot higher support. For example, 89% support the planting of about 1 trillion trees to help offset carbon in the atmosphere, and 85% support that oil and gas companies should be responsible for stopping the leaks coming from their own wells. However, when you start talking about actions that are going to curb the use of fossil fuels, the support tends to weaken and tends to be a bit more along party lines. 35% of those surveyed said we should never stop using fossil fuels, never ever. And 60% oppose the phasing out of gasoline-powered cars and trucks. 73% of Republicans polled on that particular measure say they are upset by this proposal. And 51% oppose the idea that all new construction of buildings should be all electric, which basically is the phasing out of natural gas as a heating source within buildings. Jobs in the U.S. energy industry rose by 3.8% in 2022. This was led by renewable energy. Renewable energy employment, which is defined as solar, wind, hydro, battery systems, grid improvement systems, and nuclear power is thrown in there. Well, those industries did add about 114,000 new jobs in 2022, representing about 84% of all of the energy jobs created. Now, oil and gas companies did recover about 109,000 jobs, but they have not yet recovered back to pre-pandemic levels of employment. Coal was the big loser again, losing about 7,000 jobs in 2022. This represents about 9% of the workforce, and the consumption of coal nationwide dropped by about 25%. The top 3 states for creating new energy jobs were California with 13,000 new jobs. Surprisingly, West Virginia was in second place with 7,000 new clean energy jobs, and Texas in third place with 5,100 energy jobs. Interestingly, now in West Virginia, only about 12,000 people are employed in the coal industry, while about 36,000 are employed in clean energy jobs, or roughly 3 times that of coal. And that's the news from the solar industry for this week. We'll see you next week.